bumper literally, my brother borrowed the car, the bumper fell off, and that was the good car in the family. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Fire Pit Chat with Ben and Joe. I'm Joe, and hey, Ben.
Hey, Joe. Here we are again.
Here we are. We're continuing our series heading up to Election Day here in the U.S., November 3rd, Tuesday. We've been talking about different resources and maybe different things or emotions you may be encountering, and maybe some tools to help you with that. And I think I'll share that I don't think that there's an end point on Tuesday, November 3rd. All right, I think that my work is going to continue no matter who's elected, wherever they're elected, and I think that. I guess I'm trying to bring out or share that there's a greater work for myself and for anyone who that resonates with. If you feel the same way, hopefully this will be a tool or a resource for you. All right, so the topic for this episode is we're going to just talk about the Serenity Prayer, and I got an email this morning, and it's from the Daily Reflections book. Those of you who are in recovery, it's copyright 1990, Alcoholics Anonymous. So this isn't anything we've written or take any claim to. But there were some really good questions about the Serenity Prayer. So I'll read those, Ben, and we'll jump right in.
Yep.
Do I remember that I have a right to my opinion, but that others don't have to share it? That's the spirit of live and let live. The Serenity Prayer reminds me, with God's help, to accept the things I cannot change. Am I still trying to change others? When it comes to courage to change the things I can, do I remember that my opinions are mine and yours are yours? Am I still afraid to be me? When it comes to wisdom to know the difference, do I remember that my opinions come from my experience? If I have a know-it-all attitude, aren't I being deliberately controversial? So that was just some really good questions about the Serenity Prayer, pretty well-known prayer. I really love those questions, and I think it breaks it down. I think what the Serenity Prayer, tells me is that, at least what I'm trying to take from it, and this is evolving over time, is that ultimately, if I could ever reach, this is perfection. Okay, so I'm going to give you what I believe is perfection, and knowing I may never get there, but that I've got to be the Word, right? I've got to be the Word. I can't wait for someone else to do it. I can't look to someone else to do it, right? I've got to be patient. I've got to be tolerant. I've got to be kind. I've got to be loving, accepting, obedient to God, thoughtful, and on and on and on. So that's perfection. And I know I won't get there. And now if I overlay that with this political season, right, it's really hard. Even I'm sure the most serene and peaceful and spiritually connected of us are struggling, with being those things. And so I thought that if that's the perfection, if that's the ideal, and that's just my vision, how do we break it down and make this Serenity Prayer more, I'll say, practical? And in the other episode, we talked about the theoretical versus the practical. So theoretically, I don't think anyone would disagree with what's in the Serenity Prayer. But how do I practice? And that's why I love these questions. How do I practice or make it practical? And how do I start looking at me and my behaviors and my thoughts so that I could actually start living the Word and living the prayer?
Well, I think what you've just been describing is a very big deal practically, and that is just start with some self-awareness. I think it's just easy just not to be aware of how much, because we naturally want things to be good. We want, even those of us who are not particularly obsessive about things being organized, there is, I think, deep in all of us a desire for things to have a certain order to them, have a certain predictability to them, to have some sense that the future is secure. And it's just disturbing when you see things in the world that seem like they are just potentially, at least, so disruptive and even deeply destructive. And I think it's just easy to kind of miss how inside our hearts we can begin to almost, in a way that can almost be kind of flailing inside, just be trying to address all of that. Or I think even sometimes, Joe, honestly, venting is a way of trying to sort of make sense of things. And somehow if we can make sense of them, then somehow we have a certain amount of control over them. I don't know. The psychology of this is strange, but I think just even being aware, Right now, I'm having a hard time maintaining the distinction between what I'm responsible for and what I can actually influence, and the many, many, many things that are just not something I can control. And in fact, if I try to control them, I am at best being distracted from the things that I could constructively change. Just even being awake to that. And I think we're all awake to it, probably in the sense that, as we're thinking about this, we would all say, yeah, I probably have a tendency to do that. But I find that for me, it's in the moment awareness, just realizing, this is happening. That line's getting blurry for me. That alone is helpful.
So, what do you think about the word serenity, right? So, God grant me the serenity, not grant me the strength, grant me is the serenity. That first part of the prayer is the serenity, and it's known as the serenity prayer. And so, is the ideal to get to that serenity or connected place with God if I do these things?
I do think that's the goal. I mean, as a Christian, it makes me think of one place in Paul's letters where he talks about the peace of God that surpasses understanding, guarding your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And I think that that's a kind of tranquility of soul. It's not sort of a blind head in the sand, obliviousness. It's wide awake to the realities of things, but it's a peace that comes from God. And why? Because God is able to control the things that I can't. The world is not out of control. I'm able to surrender so many things, surrender any illusion of control over them, because mysterious as it might be, I know that there is an order, there is a purpose, I have no idea what it is sometimes, but I'm not panicking because God. I mean, someone wants to find faith as just at its most basic, is just refusal to panic.
Right.
I think
So,
that's serenity.
yeah, because the serenity will lead to, I believe, my interpretation, and take it for what you will. The serenity could lead to courage, right? The serenity could lead
Yes.
to wisdom. But I start
Yes.
with that serenity.
Yeah.
Um, so getting back to what you said, so there are many people who would say, "Come on, Ben, you're crazy. The
Mm-hmm.
world is out of control. Can't you see this? Can't
Mm-hmm.
you see that? Don't you know about this?" And and that's a valid feeling. People, and they could be right. I don't know. But this prayer says the very first thing is accept the things that cannot change. So it's the world may be out of control, but I need to accept it, and I need God to give me the serenity to accept it because He's in control.
Yeah, and even if you don't believe in God, even if you don't believe there's a purpose, you don't see any order at all in anything, and you really believe the world is out of control, just at the purest existential level, you still have to start where you are and do something with whatever's in front of you. And you can't be everywhere at once, dealing with everything at once. And so I think there is a kind of, even apart from even religious considerations, I think that there is a kind of basic serenity in just realizing I am here now, and this is what's in front of me. And I love your phrase, right sizing. Right sizing yourself
Right.
to not have this idea that I'm going to be some sort of cosmic order bringer. I have to start where I am and realize there's a lot of stuff it's outside my circle. I have a circle of things, and I can do something within that circle. Outside of that, you know, it's wonderful when you can trust and believe that he's got it. He's got it. He's got all of that. However mysterious his working in the world, he's got all of that. But even if you don't believe that, it seems to me you still have to come to that place of, what are you able to do here? And you kind of have to just mentally put the rest of that aside. And I think now this is my interpretation, I think that must be at the root of what this word serenity is getting at.
Right. To your point, there are many things I cannot change, right? Whether
Many.
it's the laws of physics,
Yep.
weather, death, right?
Yeah.
Someone passes there, there's no one more minute, right?
Yep.
So there are many things. And so I think as people, and it's probably normal or healthy or just part of the human condition,
Mm.
that I don't necessarily acknowledge that there's many things I cannot change. There's actually more things I cannot change then I
Yeah.
can change. But
Yeah.
what this prayer does is, wisdom to know the difference is that I can change me. And just a flashpoint
Mm.
right now, especially in this election season, because there is a lot of calls for change, and they may be needed and they may be necessary. But I think without the serenity, we talked in the first episode, if I'm burning up in hate,
Hmm.
without that serenity, which then brings me courage to so identify the things I can, and without that wisdom, it feels like there's just a lot of flailing around, and that just creates more unease, more dis-ease,
Yep.
more uncomfortability, and we pretend, we potentially look to each other for support,
Hmm.
but without that the glue, right? Without the binder there, it just feels like maybe we're bumping into each other a lot more
Yeah.
than actually connecting.
Yeah. So, when we think about the ills of the world, the problems, there's kind of this age-old debate. Is a place to begin in responding to all that internal or external? Do your circumstances need to change before you can be okay, or is actually all of that kind of irrelevant because the real change comes from within? And I think there's probably something to be said for there's a bit of truth in both, but you've put your finger a number of times on this internal piece that yes, there's stuff circumstantially, relationally, in, in my relationship to the world out there. There's undoubtedly stuff that needs to change. A lot of that's not in my control, some of it is, but I'm in no position to do much good with any of the stuff even that I can do out there if my internal furniture is not settled. I'm and that I think this prayer puts its finger on that crucial point, which is serenity is never something that is given to you through circumstances. You bring that to circumstances. And I think honestly, Joe, for us as North Americans, that can be hard to believe because we really do have
Right.
this fantasy that if things would just fall into place circumstantially, man, I'd be so chill. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And to a certain extent, that's part of being young, right?
Yep.
Adolescent.
Yep.
But there's perhaps is a part of us not growing up in that, or that persists into our
Mm.
50s and 40s and whatever age you are. At least I'm in my 50s. So yeah, I think that persists, and that takes the work, right? So yeah, to what the first thing, if I want to really affect change, right, internally, and you said external versus internal. I think you're right. I think some people come at this in different ways. I
Hmm.
think, at least I can talk about from my recovery experience, is that common denominator was hitting a bottom, and usually that bottom has to do with me, loss of faith,
Yeah.
right? Loss of hope,
Yeah.
loss of maybe some people for that will to live. And so, however you come at it, I think that common denominator is God, or in
Hmm.
recovery, higher power, and that's why this is such a big prayer, in the recovery world. So I think that yeah, it however you get there, I think you get there through one door, regardless
Yes.
of the roads you took to get to
Yes.
that door.
Right. And so, I said a moment ago, I think it's this serenity concept has some value even if you're not religious, but obviously this is a prayer. So
Right.
the authors of this prayer were thinking in terms of the fact that you are going to find serenity within truly as a gift. God, give me. That's a very interesting it's very interesting. It isn't just a matter of someone, within their own heart and mind reflecting on their own thinking and coming to a place of kind of getting perspective. It actually is a prayer for a gift. I need this from God. In that sense, serenity does come from without. Yeah, and yet God gives it within. I mean, it's something that takes place within our hearts, but it's something that He spiritually has to give to us because sometimes do you ever find you're almost despite your best efforts you just can't seem to get a hold of that serenity even after you've talked to yourself for a while, and I just find myself so
Yeah.
helpless in the face of my own thoughts sometimes.
Yeah, most of the times. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and that's where that reaching out. I need to reach out to God to help get me grounded. And it doesn't mean it happens in that moment.
Right.
And we talked earlier about patience, right? So
Yes.
there needs to be this patience that, I was new in recovery, and I had a couple years under my belt, and I bought a car, and it was falling apart, and the bumper was falling off. There was a hole in the floorboards. I could see the floor when I drove, and I was whining. Now I hadn't uh, done any kind of substances for 4 years at that point, and really I had no right to expect anything more than just being alive. But of course I'm whining about my car, and a good friend of mine says, he goes, maybe you're not supposed to have that car yet.
Yeah.
Maybe you're supposed to have this car with the bumper falling off
Mm.
and
Mm.
the hole in the floorboard because you
Mm.
haven't learned the lessons yet.
Mm.
And that was a real practical
Yeah.
exposure for me towards the serenity prayer. Accepted things I cannot change.
Yeah.
And so I had to accept, okay, I hate this car. Bumper, literally, my brother borrowed the car, the bumper fell off, and that was the good car in the family. And he came back to me, and he had tied the bumper up with clothesline and hooked it around the spare tires, this big Buick Landau. And that was the good car in the family because my brother borrowed it to use it. But the point was, my thinking was, hey, God, I've done what you want for 4 years. I'm doing this. I'm a young guy. Help me out here.
Mm.
And the answer was the car. The answer was,
Yeah.
my friend came to me and said, you're not ready.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, is part of serenity even just the realization I don't even know what needs to change?
Right.
The idea that suffering could be actually exactly what I'm well, it's exactly what will forge in me, so much of this internal stuff that results in peace and joy and hope. Why does it so often come through the refining fire of suffering? I just want microwave serenity. I just want to push a button, 30 seconds later I'm all good. And I think that's just not, it's just not how real life works. We are in kind of long, slow refining fire often. And part of how God is giving us the gift of serenity is that we just keep praying and praying and waiting. And he knows when to give both the circumstantial changes that we're often praying for, but more importantly, he knows, he he might be answering my prayer for serenity even when I feel like I'm just in anguish.
Right. Right. And what I'm getting here is the acceptance really is the peace. And when I've got the acceptance, I mean, that's the key to
Mm-hmm.
unlock courage
Yep.
and wisdom.
Yep.
And so as I'm thinking about this prayer and about the election cycle, I'm sure roughly half of the country's candidate won't win, or for those who are engaged in that, right? So we're going to be, as a country, as a community, as a family, right? We have families that are split along
Yep.
political lines. That acceptance is gonna hit 50% of us roughly,
Yep.
on Tuesday or sometime thereafter. And so then if I can have that acceptance of what happens and believe that, you've said this a lot, and I quote you all the time. Everyone has their place in God's order, so I need to accept the outcome,
Mm.
and it's all, as you said, God is in control, and that's the order. And
Mm.
then have the courage, and we're going to talk about in our next episode. We're going to talk about the concept of 312 and 70, the courage to change the things I can, and there are some really good things, and you brought this up a couple weeks ago. Really looking forward to deep diving on that a little bit.
Mm.
To change the things I can without that hate that we talked about.
Yeah.
And then the wisdom to know, when am I acting to help in a furtherance of God and God's will? And when am
Yes.
I acting in furtherance of my ego or my
Yes.
hate or my anger?
Yes. Yeah. Is it thy kingdom come or my kingdom come? Right. I mean, it's,
Exactly.
I say it's sort of weak, but I really find in my head that's kind of the watershed.
Absolutely. So I'm looking forward. We're going to deep dive on the 312 and the 70. Thank you guys for listening to us. We're doing our ongoing election coverage, and thanks for giving us a listen. You can join our channel and pass it along. This is something we do freely. So thanks, Ben. We'll catch you on the next episode.
All right, man. Looking forward to it.